certainly not where you want to see one speak at someone's memorial service. But Justice Clarence Thomas telling those who were gathered at Barbara Olson's memorial service what she meant in his life and his wife's life, and what the joint friendship of Barbara Olson and Ted Olson meant to him. Once again, you were looking at pictures from the Cathedral of St. Thomas More in Arlington, Virginia, where Father Franklin Martin McAfee is presiding over Barbara Olson's memorial service. She, of course, was in that plane that crashed into the Pentagon. She was on her way from Dulles Airport to Los Angeles, actually phoned her husband, described the hijacking as it was going down, in fact got 2 phone calls off, thus providing investigators with valuable information about exactly what had gone wrong. We're going to take a very short break here and return with our coverage.
Ground Zero, no rest for the weary and little time to mourn. Round-the-clock search and rescue efforts go on as New York firefighters bid the first of many farewells to 3 of their own. And from the president, a promise of payback.
There's no question about it. This act will not stand. We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running, and we'll bring them to justice.
At the Pentagon, the U.S. military machine moves to respond to this national emergency. Outside, the grim job of finding the dead and assessing the damage wears on.
We do expect to be in this particular mode for approximately another 10 days as we move forward with the process of, as you might imagine, the very arduous task of removing bodies.
Hello now from Washington. I'm Judy Woodruff, along with my colleagues Paula Zahn in New York and Darren Kagan in Atlanta. Our coverage of America's new war continues. We turn first to Darren in Atlanta for the latest developments.
Judy, yet another part of the story is unfolding as now economic repercussions from Tuesday's terrorist attacks are already being felt. Continental Airlines announcing it is laying off 12,000 employees. The carrier cites an unexpected drop in air travel following the Tuesday terrorist attacks. Also, smoke still rising from Ground Zero. That's where the World Trade Center's Twin Towers once stood. A mountain of metal, concrete, and debris remains. Beneath that, countless victims. A live picture there of that scene for you now. Firefighters, emergency crews, and volunteers still swarming all over Lower Manhattan. New York, meanwhile, is holding funerals today for the fire department's chaplain, chief, and deputy commissioner. 300 firefighters and 70 police officers and Port Authority officials are among the more than 4,700 people still listed as missing in New York. Meanwhile, in Boston, Logan International Airport has reopened. The first airplane took off this morning. In addition to complying with new FAA rules, Logan has posted state police at security checkpoints and law officers in the control tower. The 2 planes that flew into the World Trade Center towers 4 days ago, of course, originated in Boston. As for the investigation of Tuesday's terrorist attacks, 2 men are being taken to New York for questioning. They were taken into custody in Texas on Wednesday. The pair had been traveling on an Amtrak train. They were carrying false identification and box cutters. A 3rd man, who's being described as a material witness, is under arrest in New York. Of course, as all this news has unfolded, people from all around New York and all around the country have wanted to do something just to be able to help. Many of those people have gone to Midtown Manhattan, to the Javits Center. We'll be checking with Bill Hemmer in just a moment. First, though, I want to bring in Paula from New York. Paula.
Darren, I don't know whether you could still hear it, but just about a minute ago you could hear church bells ringing, and I am told those are coming from St. Francis of Assisi, where New York City is honoring its chaplain of the New York City Fire Department, who lost his life while he was administering last rites to a fellow fireman. In attendance at that funeral, former President Bill Clinton, his wife Hillary Clinton, of course, the junior senator from New York, and Chelsea Clinton. We just learned this morning that Chelsea Clinton was in fact 12 blocks away from the World Trade Center during both attacks. There are some interesting facts to share with you now because this information has changed from early this morning. The New York Police Commissioner, Bernard Kerik, has held a news conference, and he is confirming so far that 92 bodies have been identified, 60 of them unidentified. The missing list has grown up to 4,972. He took no great pride in reporting this statistic. Already, there was one attempted burglary overnight at Brooks Brothers, one arrested for stealing a fireman's coat. There were reports of someone breaking into a jewelry shop, which was one of the buildings not too far from the World Trade Center complex. But perhaps the biggest news that the city wants to get out at this point is that they want to limit the number of volunteers showing up. You know, as a New Yorker, I have been amazed by the lines that have wrapped around hospitals in the area, people wanting to donate blood. There are hundreds of people who have been gathered at the Jacob Javits Center for the last 3 days wanting to volunteer. Some of those folks sitting there 3 days in a row and not called into active duty. But the city says it wants all of you to know it truly appreciates your help, but unfortunately, because it is so difficult to get into the debris area, I mean, almost every major southern artery is shut right now because they are serving, south of here, because they're serving as a staging area for the rescue and cleanup operations. So they would rather people stay home. What they really are looking for at this point is cash donations. They can't handle any more supplies. There's no place to store them. And Bill Hemmer has a very good idea of the level of support that continues. Is anybody taking this message from the police commissioner seriously right now?
Paula, to be quite frank with you, they don't care. They want to stay in line and put their name on a list somewhere and think possibly they could be called back tomorrow or later next week. Anything they can do to contribute. You mentioned hundreds of volunteers showing up here. I'd up that number quite safely to say thousands have showed up here thus far today, and they continue to come here. Again, we're on the west side of Manhattan at this point. But that word went out that you mentioned from the police commissioner in the past hour about they're okay right now when it comes to the number of volunteers. Let's get some reaction from those volunteers, many of whom have been in line for hours now. First of all, we have Lewis, right to left, Michelle, and Gregory, is it? Yes. Okay, first of all to Lewis, back over here. The fact that you will not be able to go, at least at this point, how does that make you feel?
I'm a little upset that I'm not going to be able to get there today, but if they need volunteers, I want to help. I want to do whatever I can.
What's the purpose for you staying here then?
Something, just an answer, a form, somewhere I can just put my name down, anything, so I can be called.
Michelle, what do you think? When you got the word, how did it feel?
Well, I feel that they should tell us what we can do. There must be something that we can do, whether it's picking up a broom, going down where it's dusty, and just picking up dust off the street. There's not just ground one that needs to be taken care of. There's a lot of other things. And if they just went out and told the volunteers, hey, go buy a broom and a couple of bags and start cleaning it up, anything at all.
Does it do your heart any good knowing that the city is saying we have enough people at this point?
Oh, absolutely. It does my heart good to see not just the city.
Sorry to cut you off here midstream, Bill Hemmer, but we need to go back to the St. Francis of Assisi, where Hillary Clinton is speaking in honor of Chaplain Michael Judge.
As you know so well, that it was a mission he'd been called to do. On Tuesday, when the worst of evil struck our city, I was heading toward my office at the Senate, and I heard first of the crash into the tower, and like so many people thought it must have been a terrible accident. And then shortly thereafter, the second. As I frantically began making phone calls, we were evacuated because of the third crash into the Pentagon. And I called the mayor and the governor and the president. And I think for so many people in those initial hours, it was unimaginable, except for those of you and your comrades who were there in the midst of it. And then I was called and told that Father Michael Judge had died doing what he was called to do. And all of a sudden, the enormity of the tragedy became very personal. It will take a very long time before any of us can even find the words to express what this cowardly, evil act meant and did to people we knew and loved, to our city and our country. But as a Christian, I think often of another terrible day, a Friday of despair, darkness, and death. A Friday that left behind so much pain and hopelessness. And yet, Sunday was coming, and Sunday did come. As we continue the work of rescue, recovery, rebuilding, reconstruction, we have to remember the spirit, the life, and the love that Father Mike left us, pulling us one to the other, giving us strength where it seems hard to imagine it could ever come again, and being resolute in our commitment to do everything we can to ensure that not one person who lost his or her life on our Tuesday of death and darkness will have died in vain. So thank you, Father Judge. Father, you gave us so many gifts when you were alive, gifts of laughter and love. And blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and you came to us. And now you've gone ahead, but you will never be forgotten, and we are grateful for the blessings of your life. Thank you.
That, of course, is Senator Hillary Clinton eulogizing Chaplain Michael Judge, making multiple references to her faith, her Christian roots, basically saying that Chaplain Michael Judge, who died administering last rites to a fireman, had not died in vain, and certainly that other Americans who lost their lives had not died in vain. Right now, it is time to check in with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who joins us from St. Vincent's Hospital. For those of you, before we get going with this, aren't familiar with the geography of New York, St. Vincent's was in fact one of the first hospitals that patients were first transported to after this horrendous tragedy. What are you finding there this morning, Doctor?
That's right, Paula. You know, it seems in some ways there's been a sense of normalcy returned to Greenwich Village, here where St. Vincent's Hospital is located. And just behind me, you can see an ambulance that has just taken off and dropped off another patient here to St. Vincent's Hospital. We've had a chance to walk around, talk to a lot of people. Despite the normalcy, you look around and you still see missing persons walls, Paula. People gathering up, coming to the walls, seeing if they can find somebody that they may have known, a neighbor, a friend, a relative even. People have been walking around. The efforts, the volunteer efforts have just been remarkable. I mean, people say, as you've said many times earlier today, that they got more than enough perishable goods already. What we're hearing from the volunteer workers is save your perishable goods, give it in a week or a couple of weeks, because we're going to be needing it for a long time, so certainly that would be a better time to do it. Here at St. Vincent's Hospital, Paula, was one of the frontline hospitals. Of 552 patients or so have been treated here directly from this Tuesday tragedy. Only about 30 or so remain in the hospital today, so all the rest of those were either released right away or released subsequently since the tragedy. The doctors have been heroes. We certainly do have heroes behind those doors, and they have been taking outstanding care of the patients. Paula.
Let me ask you this, Doctor. I know the city's advising people to, to stay away. They appreciate their generosity. Are there still doctors there ready to go on duty who have come in from other hospitals and simply won't go away? Or do they feel now that there are only, over 24 or so folks there that their help simply is not needed?
What I've been hearing, I've been talking to the doctors, some of these doctors, my friends, Paula, here in New York, and what I've been hearing from them is that they were ready to stand by and expected thousands of patients. Certainly they didn't get the call for that number of patients. They are still waiting, taking shifts, trying to rotate duties so that no one becomes overexhausted, and they're still standing ready in case more patients may show up. So there's certainly a optimism that I still feel amongst the doctors, amongst the healthcare personnel, and certainly amongst everyone here at St. Vincent's Hospital.
All right, Doctor, thanks so much for that report. I don't know whether you can make this out in the shot behind me, but I think it needs to have some attention called to it. This is the first day from this vantage point that you can actually see buildings break out from behind that cloud of smoke that's been shrouding the city for the last 4 days. There still are tremendous fumes coming out of the crash sites. The rescue workers on duty there are still taking tremendous cautions, not only because of the quality of the air, but because of the danger they continue to face. There are a lot of unstable buildings that surround the perimeter of this area. We have been told that 100 buildings in all have been either partially destroyed or damaged in some way since these terrorist attacks. Just to give you a perspective on what that means in New York City, because we got an awful lot of big buildings here. A company that manages these buildings is now saying at least 20% of all of the office space in that part of New York City has been damaged in some way. The structural engineers that have been studying these buildings say there are some pretty big chunks out of them. There was great concern a 54-story tower was going to fall the other day, but thankfully it appears as though that structure has not been so degraded that is going to happen. But for all these folks you see toiling down there, some of them with their bare hands, some of them literally picking up debris and putting it into buckets to carry out. If you want to think about the magnitude of the work that is involved here, so far 13,000 tons of stuff has been removed from here. It is an extremely painstaking process, and Richard Roth, one of our own correspondents, is standing about 10 blocks from that area right now, and he can probably give us some more insights as to what these rescuers continue to face. What are you seeing from your location today?
Well, Paula, the large cloud of smoke is still present. It's back to a clear blue sky. Very similar conditions to that Tuesday when the passenger plane struck the World Trade Center towers. The workers continue to take rubble out by truck, dump truck. Those are kind of the major sounds you do hear from the distance. We're about 8 to 10 blocks north of the site, and you hear a large rumble, a crash of glass or something. And there's a big American flag that's now been put up on the American Express corporate building that at one point earlier earlier in the week was deemed a little bit risky to rescue workers. President Bush, Paula, had noted earlier today that Americans should return to their everyday lives, but I think the big issue for many people will be the fear of flying, fear of security. With me right now is one passenger who was on one of the first planes to leave Oakland, California yesterday to head to the East Coast, Donald Kinsman, and what he went through and some of the other passengers, nothing actually happened, but what went on during the flight? Tell us the mood when you boarded and how the passengers looked and sounded.
We boarded the plane. It was incredibly somber. It seemed like everybody was fearful, quiet.
Flight attendant, though?
Flight attendant seemed nervous to me. Other pilots coming off other planes.
One was crying, though?
One of the flight attendants, I was told, was crying. I didn't see that.
And then about an hour before the plane got to New York, just describe what happened in the plane.
Well, a couple guys got up in the aisle. They could have been Middle Eastern descent. They looked like, they might have been. And I think people got a little antsy, including myself. Everybody was sort of looking and a little nervous. And all of a sudden, I noticed that there were a couple passengers up in front, up by the pilot's door, along with the JetBlue employees. They were all up close to the pilot's door, and everybody was sort of looking back and forth, trying to be calm, but you sensed that there was a tension and a nervousness.
JetBlue being one of America's newer airlines, one of your friends and one of the other passengers had told me that some of the huskier passengers stood up in the aisle as if to say, we're ready to take you on, should you indeed be somebody posing trouble.
I sort of interpreted it that way, yes. Yeah, I think that's what was going on. Yeah.
What did you see from your passenger jet as you approached Manhattan of the former World Trade Center site?
We flew right over the site. We flew right over it. We saw it. And the woman behind me started crying. And it was a pretty emotional moment, I have to say.
And JetBlue is an airline which provides live telecasts of all news channels, so thus what happened on the flight?
We were watching the planes crashing into the towers probably 3 times. Finally, my wife sort of nudged me and made me turn it off. She said, I can't see this anymore, So it was scary. It was scary. I didn't know if we'd get here. There was no reason why we wouldn't, but you were thinking that the whole time.
Okay. Donald Kinsman, thank you very much. You were with your wife on your honeymoon out there in California. You're transiting up to Buffalo later today. Some of the fear that no doubt many passengers will be undergoing in flights to come. Judy?
Yes, if yesterday, as we listened to these accounts of what happened over the last few days, the president, of course, along with all of us, has been following this closely. Yesterday, a day he came to New York City to tour the recovery efforts around the World Trade Center. Today, he's sending a very forceful signal. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Kelly Wallace, who was near Camp David, and Bob Franken, our national correspondent, who's at the Pentagon. Kelly, the president used words today in his radio address that at any other time would be alarming to us, but I think we take them in stride given what's happened.
Absolutely. A number of very significant messages coming from the president, who, as you noted, is spending the weekend at the presidential retreat at Camp David, going over what he says will be a comprehensive assault against terrorism, one that will include political, economic, and quite possibly military options. Mr. Bush doing a number of things today. He's telling the American people that this conflict won't be easy and it won't be short. So he's urging Americans to be patient. He told anyone in uniform to get ready. And then, Judy, for the very first time, he used these 3 words.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly. And I appreciate very much the American people understanding that. As we plan, as we put our strategy into action, we will let you know when we think it's appropriate, not only for to protect the lives of our servicemen and women, but to make sure our coalition has had proper time to be noticed as well. But we're going to act.
And the president talking to reporters before a meeting which included Vice President Cheney as well as other members of his national security team. As you know, and we've been reporting, Vice President Cheney has been spending the past few days up at Camp David after the U.S. Secret Service decided it would be best, because of security concerns, not to have the vice president and the president in the same place. Now, Mr. Bush also doing something else for the very first time today. For the first time, he named suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden as a, quote, prime suspect. He also said that if bin Laden believed he could keep away from the U.S. and its allies, Mr. Bush saying bin Laden was, quote, sorely mistaken.
They will try to hide. They will try to avoid the United States and our allies. But we're not going to let them. They run to the hills. They find holes to get in. And we will do whatever it takes to smoke them out and get them running, and we'll get them.
And bin Laden believed to be hiding out in Afghanistan. Judy, one final other significant development. Neighboring Afghanistan, of course, is Pakistan. Secretary of State Colin Powell confirming today what CNN reported yesterday, that the Pakistanis have fully agreed to honor all requests from the U.S., which include the possibility of the U.S. using Pakistani airspace if the U.S. decides to wage any military attack. Judy?
All right, Kelly Wallace reporting from near Camp David. Bob Franken also joining us from the Pentagon, where there are two missions. One is to carry out any plans for war, as the president so bluntly put it today. Also to continue the recovery effort of the crash site. Bob?
Well, let's talk about the effort to carry out the plans first. And as we know, that's going to involve the use of reserve forces. Now, very quickly, the United States has about 1,300,000 reservists, about half of the total military force of the United States. Of that, just a small percentage has been authorized to be called up. 50,000 members of the reserves, that's the reserves of the various forces, and the National Guard. About 35,000 of those will be called up. As you can see, the Army is going to supply 10,000, the Air Force 13,000, the Marines 7,500, the Navy 3,000, and the Coast Guard, which normally operates under the Department of Transportation, will provide 2,000. As you might suspect, looking at the fact that the Coast Guard is involved, these are going to be used for what the Pentagon calls homeland defense, supporting the effort in the United States in this remarkable time to offer military protection to the domestic front right here. Now, as you pointed out, Judy, at the same time that the reserve call-up is being envisioned in this building, the plans are still being made. At the very same time, the efforts are being made to reconstruct this building, which, of course, was the target of a catastrophic air collision that happened on Tuesday. And we're finding out that this is quite a remarkable building, larger, for instance, than 3 Empire State Buildings, badly damaged. You can see that we have close-up shots of where the plane hit, and right next to where the plane hit, you can see that it was just this tangled mess inside, as you might imagine, and you can see that a large effort is being made to shove away all the debris and build a huge number of wood shoring supports so there would not be a further collapse. They're making quite a bit of progress, according to the people inside, but what they're encountering, they say, is something that is just almost remarkable to see.
This is on the first floor. This is very close to where the airplane went into. You can see the evidence of some of the different shoring that they're using in order to shore up the building. The way they described it to me is they come in, they remove some debris, they shore it up, they move in further, they move some debris, they shore it up. And it reminded me of being like in a coal mine filled with metal shards all over the place.
Now, that was Terry Mitchell, who was describing the video that the Pentagon provided. It was shot yesterday. Terry Mitchell of the Department of Defense. Now, what is so remarkable about all this is the fact that this occurred in a just renovated section of the Pentagon where new, very, very blast-resistant glass was installed. Many of the windows stayed. They were not shattered at all, which probably was life-saving. And they went on to describe a situation where, at the point where the plane actually penetrated the building, on the floors up from there, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, people were able to get out. They were not injured. They were actually able to crawl out without injury. Remarkable renovation, which is being extended around the Pentagon. Now, of course, it's going to have to be expanded to repair what was already done. Judy?
And Bob, just to clarify, unlike New York, where they believe there may be pockets where people possibly, not likely, but possibly could be alive, and of course we all pray for that, at the Pentagon they don't see any pockets where a human being is likely to have survived.
They're not. They don't want to say so yet. They continue to insist they're not ready to give up, so they continue to look, but they will admit privately what they're really looking for are casualties. They have found several bodies today. They're not talking about the number yet, but of course we know that the latest estimate is for 189 casualties. That is to say, victims, people who were killed in this crash. You can look at what you're seeing here and just imagine that it might have been much worse. That's what they're saying here, but of course it was catastrophic, no matter how few were actually killed compared to what might have happened.
And just quickly, Bob, for the first few days, family members, loved ones of those missing were near the Pentagon trying to either get involved themselves or observing. Are there any people like that around now?
Well, every once in a while you find somebody, particularly at the site that has been set up for media, about a mile away. They will be there sometimes. There is a hotel nearby where people can gather to get support and to get information, but for the most part there is very little to do but wait and expect the worst.
All right, Bob Franken reporting from the Pentagon, referring to that other mission at the headquarters for the United States military, that is to carry out any action of war. The United States House of Representatives last night passed a measure that authorizes President Bush to use force against those responsible for Tuesday's attacks. There was only one vote in the House against it. It was from California Representative Barbara Lee. CNN congressional correspondent Kate Snow joins us now from the Capitol with more on this lone dissenting voice. Kate.
Well, Judy, it was a late night for the House of Representatives. They were here until about 2 in the morning this morning. They did vote last night, and it's important to point out that almost everyone voted for this resolution to use force. They are trying to give the president some backing. They are saying that he can use force against those responsible specifically for the attacks on Tuesday. The Senate had voted early yesterday morning unanimously on the same measure. But as you mentioned, there was one lone voice of dissent in the House of Representatives, and that was California Democrat Barbara Lee.
Some of us must urge the use of restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control.
Lee also had some concerns shared by many of her colleagues, and that is they didn't want to give too much leeway to the president. They didn't want him to be allowed to use force in the future without having to come back to this Congress to get permission, if you will. They think that the language they have now in this resolution provides that kind of insurance that the president would have to come back here if he wanted to go after anyone other than those responsible for Tuesday's attacks. Now, despite Lee's objections, of course, this resolution passed overwhelmingly, 420-1, and again, it had already passed the Senate. It is the first action like this, Judy, since the Persian Gulf War in 1991. Judy.
And Kate, some very careful language in there, making it clear that under the War Powers Act, Congress still has the right to come back, to be specific, just to clarify that.
That's right, exactly.
All right, Kate Snow at the Capitol. And now back to Darren Kagan in Atlanta. Darren.
Judy, thank you. Want to go ahead and bring up to date folks who might just be joining us, or if they're following the story, bringing you the latest developments in the attack on America. President Bush today prepared Americans for a long and sustained war. He named for the first time publicly, saying that Osama bin Laden is what he called a prime suspect. Also today, Pakistan would be a key route to any U.S. attacks on terrorist camps inside Afghanistan. Pakistan today vowing to cooperate with the U.S. The ruling Taliban of Afghanistan promised to take action against anyone helping the U.S. attack its country. Law enforcement has made the first arrest in the terror case. Others are being detained at the same time. And on the economic front, Continental Airlines is laying off 12,000 workers. The shutdown this week taking a big toll on the airline industry. I'm going to take a closer look now on the global support that's coming for the U.S. military and has frankly been a groundswell of support in response to Tuesday's attacks. Some of it, in fact, coming from surprising quarters. Moscow moved closer to condoning military retaliation. Senior Russian officials say those who carried out the deadly operation should be punished, but punishment must be based on reliable facts. More now on Pakistan, which is signaling a growing willingness to work with the U.S. Pakistan, as we mentioned, pledging yesterday to fully cooperate, and its Cabinet and Security Council voting today to help the international community fight terrorism. At issue is neighboring Afghanistan, which has been known to shelter suspected terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden, which we heard President Bush name as the prime suspect in this case. Afghanistan has issued its own warning of retaliation if the U.S. launches military attacks within its borders. Of course, people on the ground in Afghanistan, we've heard, are very nervous about what might be to come. We have our own Nick Robertson on the ground there. He is in Kabul, Afghanistan. Nick, obviously it's nighttime where you are. You can describe for us what the mood is for the people living in Kabul.
Well, certainly, Darren, people here are concerned. We have heard stories of people leaving the town, some of them trying to get out to Pakistan, others trying to go and live with relatives in the countryside. Also hearing about food prices here going up as well, perhaps 10 to 15%. Now, as part of the scenario that's going on between Afghanistan and Pakistan right now, it's looking increasingly likely that the border between the two countries could close sometime in the future. And most of the food coming to Kabul and many other parts of Afghanistan comes from Pakistan. So that is another concern of the people here, not only the possibility of attack, but also the possibility that their food resources could start drying up. So there's been some not panic buying, but certainly people trying to buy up sufficient stocks to see them through for a while. But the Taliban earlier today were really keen to try and head off the Pakistani government from deciding to assist the United States in any attack on Afghanistan. And their statement was designed specifically towards Pakistan, telling them that if the United States was to use Pakistan's airspace or soil, then they would consider that an attack by Pakistan on Afghanistan. And they warned very much that they might use an army, their own Mujahideen fighting army, they say, to move into Pakistan. This is how a Taliban spokesman laid it out.
If neighboring or regional countries, particularly Islamic countries, gave a positive response to American demand for military bases, it would spark up extraordinary danger. Similarly, if any neighboring country gave territorial way or airspace to USA against our land, it would draw us into an imposed war.
Darren, also tribal elders around the country today meeting, advising the Taliban not to close down diplomatic channels, but also saying to them if they are attacked, all the tribes in Afghanistan would support the Taliban. Darren?
That's our Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan. Nick, thank you very much. Of course, people in Afghanistan aren't the only ones wondering about what might come next in terms of a military response from the United States, people across the U.S. and around the world as well. With more on that, let's check in with our Miles O'Brien, who's looking at different options. Miles.
Thank you very much, Darren. I'm here with General Wesley Clark, and we're just spending a little bit of time orienting ourselves on some maps we've found of Afghanistan and the surrounding regions. General Clark is our military analyst, of course, former Supreme Commander of NATO. General, first of all, before we get started into the details of what we're talking about here, I think there is an impression out there among people who've heard the debates over Pentagon spending and the need to spend more that the Pentagon and the military forces may not be at a state of readiness for something which is contemplated right now. What's your sense of it?
I think we're very, very ready. The debate about the Pentagon spending is about the future of the armed forces. We're talking about now. And we've paid a lot of attention over the years to being ready now. Could we have been more ready? Could we have had more people and more equipment? Sure, but we're in good shape.
Of course, a lot of what they're talking about is that ability to fight a two-theater type conflict, which is does not necessarily apply in this case.
That's right.
Generally speaking, as military planners think about some sort of response to this, are they thinking about big numbers, or is it more of a special forces type of approach?
Well, it's small numbers initially because we're only dealing with a network of people. We'd like to go after the specific individuals who are involved. Now, it may turn into something else, and so our planners are going to be thinking several steps down the road. If we do one thing and he does something else, and then we come back again. And so we've got to be thinking about this in depth in time and depth in geography. And it's what Colin Powell said, multidimensional.
All right, now let's see if we can get this map to cooperate with us a little bit. It's a little bit...
Well, we're looking at the northern part of Afghanistan here.
All right, so the northern part, let's scroll it down just a little bit if we can. This touch screen has to cooperate a little bit. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on 1 second. And bear with us here. While we're doing this, why don't I ask you this? Overall, how much... this is not exactly a stable region, just to help people understand exactly where we are.
This is a really
This is the border.
Unstable, lots of refugees,
right.
Tribal.
Uh-huh.
It's been racked by conflict for 20 years. It's been infiltrated with various, not only tribes that move across, back and forth through these provinces and across the border, but also religious sects.
So you've got this unstable region. You've got a porous border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. As a military planner, do you have to kind of look at the region as a whole then, don't you?
You do. You have to take a big picture view of this. Now, what we would like to do, of course, is to the precise point, but you can't.
All right. This is Kabul right here, by the way, just to give you a sense of it. This is a very mountainous region, and as we consider the possibility of this scenario, you have to hearken back to 1979, the Soviet invasion to Afghanistan.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit about that, some of the pitfalls that were involved there. A lot of people have called that the Soviet Vietnam. What was the issue there as we look at some of these pictures?
They came in to establish a government that was more favorable to them. They put the government in power, and they reinforced it with significant military forces, conventional military forces, moved in from the north out of Soviet Asia, and moved down through avenues of approach here, occupied Kabul, and discovered, and I don't remember the exact avenues of approach, but they're going into this direction, and occupied Kabul and discovered then that controlling the capital is not the same as controlling the country. They fell into the plight
Miles,
of
I'm sorry.
invaders.
My apologies to you and to the general. I want to just jump in here a second. We have some breaking news taking place in Midtown Manhattan. This is near the Javits Center, where thousands of people have shown up to volunteer only to be turned away. Our Bill Hemmer is on the scene there. Bill, what do you have?
Yeah, Darren, thank you, and hello to you also. The police commissioner about, I'd say 90 minutes ago made the word official, and it just spread to the area here where thousands had hoped to gather so their services could be used to volunteer. The police department came by just about 5 minutes ago and made the announcement. This is how that went down a short time ago.
But due to the overabundance of iron workers and everybody, there's no further need today for your type of skills. We thank you, but you have to go home. Just be advised, please keep advised of the TV and see what they need. But right now, there's no further need for any type of volunteer construction workers.
And clearly a wave of disappointment quickly swept over this crowd. Again, thousands of people had converged on here. They're leaving in droves at this point. A number of people said they're just going to start walking downtown and see what they can do eventually when they get there. Jason Harrison, is it, Jason? A firefighter who came in from the state of Michigan near Fleet and Hadley Township. You were in the construction site in the rubble last night.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a chance today. How do you feel?
I don't know. It's kind of sickened. I mean, it's horrible down there. You know, a lot of dead bodies. The smell is really bad.
Why'd you come here, Jason?
Just to try to help. I didn't want to stay at home and just sit on my hands, you know, and say, well, I wish there was something I could do. You know, I thought I'd just, get up and go help.
What about tomorrow? Do you hold out hope that you might be able to contribute then?
I'm not sure. I gotta go back to work on Monday, so I don't know. We haven't decided yet. I'm down here with another guy, so we have to kind of decide together.
Okay, listen, best of luck to you. Thanks for stopping by. Jason Harrison, a fire department official here, a firefighter, I should say, more correctly, who's come to Manhattan to help out in any way he can. Quickly, Darren, I want to let you know, the word's going out once again. They need respirators, especially the kind with the replaceable canisters. They need hard hats with lights. They need welding equipment, welding gloves as well. They need flashlights and batteries. They're saying they don't need any food or any water, but prayers indeed are appreciated at any point. And Governor Pataki expected on the scene here just about a half block from where we are at this point. Darren?
Bill, question on the supplies you say they need. Let's say someone in Iowa or California or Florida is watching and wants to actually physically send that stuff. Where do they send it to?
The information we're getting, Darren, again, this is a little loose at this point, but what we're being told, Shea Stadium out in Flushing Meadow, open 24 hours a day for all non-perishable products. Giant Stadium across the river here in New Jersey, they're saying from noon to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, of course, all non-perishables as well. But I'm also told that a lot of these places are filling up quickly here. Richie, if you want to take us over here, we showed you this throughout the morning. This is Darren. This is just one small sample, and believe me, just one small sample of the enormous input. I mean, people talk about American generosity. Well, it has not only bubbled, but it has burst here as well. I mean, there is so much water and so much food here. And again, this is just a small portion, just about a block from where we are located here. There are several large tents that have all this material inside of them. And again, that's why the word's going out. They don't need any more of this, but the items I mentioned again, especially those respirators with the replaceable canisters, to make sure that the rescuers that are in the rubble can indeed continue their work. They also mentioned things like insoles and foot powder and vapor rub as well, and also goggles to wear over the eyes to make sure the dust keeps out. So that's the urgent need at this point, and they're hoping that a lot of folks can come through at this point as well.
Bill Hemmer in Midtown Manhattan. Bill, thank you very much. It sounds like it's going to be a frustrating early afternoon for folks showing up, wanting to help, and yet the biggest thing they can do is a thing that will be so hard, and it sounds like from police, just go home and continue to hope and pray. Let's take it up to Judy in Washington, D.C. Judy.
Darren, so many pieces of the story we're following over at the Pentagon, just on the other side of the Potomac River. Rescue recovery crews working on getting the debris out of there. We are told they're on top of the building now, lifting some large pieces, which could be parts of that 757, which came into the Pentagon on Tuesday morning, an American flight. And we're trying, along with you, to get a better look at exactly what the crews are doing. As you can see, they put support beams up there to support them as they take these pieces out, literally one by one. And like New York, they've been working around the clock. Back in New York City, the service for the chaplain for the New York City Fire Department is just about to wrap up. Father Michael Judge was the chaplain. He was, in fact, administering the last rites to, we presume, an emergency worker when he lost his own life. This is at the Cathedral of St. Francis Assisi in New York. A little while ago, we heard New York Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton speaking there, describing what happened to him as unimaginable, talking along with others about the many, many lives that Father Judge had touched. Someone who must have had a personal relationship with everyone in that fire department. Nearby in Long Island, in Farmingdale, Long Island, memorial service for Fire Chief Peter Gansey. This is a man who had come up through the ranks at the fire department, spent over 30 years, literally had held every position there was to hold in the New York City Fire Department, had risen to the rank of fire chief, and he was there on the job, doing his job, when the World Trade Center collapsed. As we watch these pictures that are so hard for all of us, joining us is Russell Friedman, who is a grief counselor. He's joining us from Los Angeles. Russell Friedman, your career is spent consoling people who are dealing with enormous loss, like the people we're seeing here this morning. What's the first thing you try to do when you are talking with someone who has suffered such an incredible loss?
Great question, Judy. The most important thing to do in creating communication about loss is to go first and tell the truth about yourself. Nobody likes being interrogated, and especially about feelings. So it's real important for me to say, I've been having the same human reaction, and in doing that, it opens up so that people can tell me the truth about themselves.
Why is that important?
Because if not, they don't feel safe. I could do something that sounds a little humorous here, but almost anybody listening who's married, if honey says, "What's wrong, honey?" almost everybody says nothing. And that's with someone you love and trust. The problem is we feel judged. If we say we feel bad, then someone automatically says, don't feel bad, tomorrow's another day. So if I tell the truth and then I get told not to feel the way I feel, which is also absurd, because if you telling me not to feel bad is going to fix me, I wouldn't have needed to tell you in the first place. I could have just told myself not to feel bad. So safety is real important here. And this week, safety is the primary emotional issue. We are fearful of everything. So we need to feel safe enough to tell the truth about how we feel, especially about being scared.
Russell Friedman is executive director of the Grief Recovery Institute in Los Angeles. Is there something different, Mr. Friedman, about what people are feeling under these kinds of circumstances where there were so many lives lost in such a horrific act of terrorism from any other death?
Yes and no. Those of us who are not directly involved, who did not have people in the airplanes or in the buildings, we're experiencing quite a different phenomenon. In the first place, everything we are familiar with in our existence changed between Monday and Tuesday. We've experienced a loss of safety, a loss of trust, and a loss of control. But more than that, Judy, the tremendous emotion comes from another idea, and the idea is this. When this loss occurs, it makes you think about every loss you've ever had in your life. It triggers your memory to identify feelings of sadness. And in that sadness, you go back to a dog that died when you were a child, or your grandma, and so on.
Yes, hi.
Russell Friedman, if you could just stay with us for a moment. Brian Nelson joins us. He is outside St. Francis Assisi Church in New York, where they've been holding a service for the chaplain of the New York Fire Department, Father Michael Judge. Brian?
Thank you, Judy. It's a very moving moment out here in the streets of New York. This is 31st Street, and on one side of the street, the Church of St. Francis of Assisi, where the funeral services just concluded for Father Michael Judge. He was the chaplain of the New York City Fire Department. As you may be able to see on screen now, there are hundreds of New York City firemen lining this street. They're in front of 24 Hook and Ladder Station, right across the street. He was probably most personally known by every one of these men and women in this fire department, but he catered right across the city to all the firemen. And
he was there on the scene. He died because he was there to be part of what his men were doing.
What we heard this morning, Judy, was that he had received word that there was trouble down at the World Trade Center, and they said that Father Judge, your services are probably going to be needed. He changed from his habit into his fire uniform and jumped in his car and raced down. And he was there to minister and administer last rites to a fireman who had been killed by one of the bodies, one of the people who had jumped from the tower, one of the two towers, as the fires engulfed the middle floors. And as he was administering last rites, he himself died. And we heard a moving description of how firemen retrieved his body from the rubble and carried it to a nearby church. And they laid him on the altar of a church, and there he rested safely as they went back to work. This is just a very moving moment. This service has lasted over 2 hours. In attendance, former President Bill Clinton, New York's junior Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton, and their daughter Chelsea. The funeral cortege now beginning to move out. The funeral cortege now about to move out, and you just witnessed a last salute to Father Michael Judge, the chaplain to the New York City Fire Department, and his helmet placed into the hearse alongside the casket. He has been the chaplain of the New York Fire Department for 10 years, and he is the first to have died, I'm told, in the line of duty. He was 68 years old, and the stories about him, many professional, him helping members of the fire department, especially across the street at 24 Hook and Ladder, those people who knew him best, with their personal problems, problems with wives and girlfriends, problems with sick children. We heard a story of him visiting a fireman's sick child in hospital every single day until the child was released. He's loved everywhere in this city. We hear stories of him walking around the streets of New York with money in his pocket and discreetly handing it out to the homeless who he encounters along the way. A man of a generous heart and great tolerance, and for whom the events down at the World Trade Center on Tuesday, I am told, would just be shocking. It's just horrible. Now, this is the first of New York's funerals from the disaster at the World Trade Center. There are two others who will be buried today. They are both firemen who lost their lives. And we will probably see hundreds, if not thousands, of funerals similar to this as the days and weeks roll on, as the authorities and the rescuers retrieve remains of the deceased at the site and identify the bodies and return them to families. This is just the start of what is going to be a very, very tragic and heartfelt period in American history. Judy?
Brian Nelson at this conclusion of a memorial service, as Brian was saying, for chaplain Father Michael Judge, the chaplain for the New York Fire Department. And Brian, you're absolutely right. This is just the beginning. The grief flows on and on. And back to you, Russell Friedman, grief counselor in Los Angeles. These funerals, obviously most of them being held in a house of worship. To what extent is religion some element of spirituality, of comfort to family and loved ones in these times?
Well, for those whose faith has not been breached, it is of tremendous comfort. We also have to address the fact that this kind of situation puts us all in question. I'm sure you've seen the same programs I have, where the questions of how can this happen test everyone's faith. What we believe is that in addition to any faith anyone has, which is tremendously helpful, they need tremendous emotional skills to deal with this, because as well as being a spiritual event, it's the most massive emotional upheaval in this country. We have a collective broken heart, and the heart and the spirit are connected. So those who can use spiritual tools, boy, is that a big benefit at this point in time.
So when you say whose faith has not been breached, you mean because of just the sheer how difficult it is to believe that God would let something like this happen?
Exactly. As human beings, we ask those questions. I watched several clergy of various faiths this week on the television nationally addressing that issue. And it's an age-old question, and it sure comes up now. Our position is that no matter what your beliefs or what the position of your beliefs are today, your heart is broken. Everything that was familiar in your life Monday is no longer familiar. And you have to address all of your being, both the intellectual, the spiritual, and the emotional. Of course, what we do is it addresses the emotional. And of course, my biggest concern, Judy, at the Grief Recovery Institute is for the children, because everyone is calling us saying, how do we talk to our children? So if we have a moment, I'd like to, if you and I can talk about that a little, I think it might help a lot of people watching.
Russell Friedman, who heads the Grief Recovery Institute in Los Angeles, has written about grief and recovery and written about children grieving. And of course, many, many families, many children are affected by this week's tragedies.
If I may say, Judy, one of the things that happened earlier this week, I was sitting in a makeup chair before going on a TV show, and I was talking to the young makeup woman who had an 8-year-old daughter. And the prior night, Tuesday night of the event, the daughter told the mommy she was scared. So I said to the mommy, did you tell her you were scared too? And she said, no. And I said very gently, gosh, why would you lie to her? She said, what did you mean? I said, your daughter responds to your body language. She probably knows